Now, we just saw like both the connectivity services as well as the device services. Now we will move on to analytics service. Once we have the data, because we see that the data has been coming into IoT core from the devices, so we looked into the device software, the connectivity software, and then the data we have, like how can we build analytics out of it is what we will look into now. Now, there are different services again here, which is like IoT things graph. So when we want to have like a flow of uh, understanding of how the data works, so we can, I mean, IoT things graph, whatever you see in the display, that's how it works. Like you can have like a trigger that can trigger a lambda function or do something, publish or something periodically. So this one, it triggers lambda function, and then that checks if it is a day or a night. If it's day, it turns off the light. If it is night, it turns on the light. So stuff like that, we can create like a very simple flow. This is like very basic, but uh, you can add enough number of entities, IoT devices, lambda functions, and all that stuff, so that you will be able to control in a very orchestrated way. And IoT events is like one another AWS service. So when we get the data from IoT core, the data we get in IoT core, we can then define what that data means. We can have a model to it, and then we can perform certain actions on top of it. This is like one good example. So we first onboard the IoT device here. So we create the certificates, we provision everything, and then after we have configured the IoT device, this IoT device keeps checking based on its location. Is a satellite coming in its horizon or not? If it is coming, it publishes in a particular topic that goes to IoT core. And from there, it goes to IoT core rules engine. The rules engine triggers IoT events. Now, this IoT events, what it does is like it checks depending on the satellite's coordinates, if it is in boundary or out of boundary. Depending on what algorithm we have specified, it will trigger a SNS function, and I mean SNS topic, and then the message will be going on. So this is like one example of how IoT events will work. And there is IoT analytics, which is something we will look into now. And what happens in this is like the data that we keep getting in IoT core, there's a way of how we can collect that data, process that data before we store it, and from that we can kind of create data sets and then create visualizations or use it in a machine learning training model. So basically IoT analytics feeds into the data lake of the organization. This is like one use case. A smart home device sends sensor data to IoT core. IoT core sends data to IoT analytics. In IoT analytics, all these four works together. So there's a channel that collects data from IoT core in a particular topic, and that is fed to pipeline. So if there is any kind of processing that needs to happen, we do it in pipeline. And but I mean, we can store data persistently in channels, and pipeline is just a process that it goes through, and then data store is like persistent again. We can store the process data in data store, and this can happen like either indefinitely or on a rolling basis, like save only the last 30 days of data, 90 days of data, stuff like that. From the data that is available in the data store, we can create a data set using SQL, and then that data set can either be visualized in QuickSight, or we can forward it to other services like Grafana as well. And that same data set, we can use it for machine learning as well in SageMaker. Now we have this thing already, right? Like we have two environmental sensors that sends data to AWS Greengrass that's running locally, which is sending data to IoT core. And now we know like what topics is it publishing in. Now can we look into like how that data can be fed into IoT analytics and can be visualized in QuickSight? So what we can do now is like the data has been coming in already. So if I just subscribe to it, I can see that data coming in again. So from ENV monitor 1, we have this data. Similarly, from ENV monitor 2 as well, we have the data. Now what I will do is go create a rule, and then, okay, first see how, let's create a channel, everything in IoT Analytics. Now, when we work with IoT Analytics, there are a couple of ways of how we can store the data. Either we can store it in a customer managed S3 bucket, or we can store it in AWS managed S3 bucket. If we store it in customer managed, which means like we can actually go look at all the messages that has been coming in, and then we will be able to provision it. But if we want AWS to manage all that data for us, we can simply go ahead and then we can create the IoT Analytics, the channel. Currently there's like no channel, pipeline, data store, or data set, but let me create one here. So I will do, let's say, ENV monitor. So messages from both the devices, I wanted to get to this IoT Analytics thing. And I don't want to specify MQTT topic. I'll just click on create resource. So it will create a channel, data store, pipeline, as well as data set. So if I go here, it should tell me ENV monitor channel, pipeline, any activities that this pipeline does. And then there is data set, data store, and then there is data set. I can go back to the IoT rules now. And what I can do is like create, and then let's say I call this IoT Analytics rule, and I want this to have all the messages from reskill /plus/POV, and the action that has to be taken is like it needs to forward the data into IoT Analytics. Okay, now that I have done it, configure the action. I already have the IoT Analytics channel, so I'll manually select it. Channel name is ENV monitor channel, and I'll create a role that ENV monitor IoT Analytics. Create the role that does the job, and then I'll click on add action. So everything is configured, and then I can click on create rule. Let's also enable this rule. So all the messages that is going to IoT core now is being forwarded to IoT Analytics. So now if I go to the channel, it usually takes a few seconds or sometimes up to a minute for the data to actually start showing up in the IoT Analytics channel. Okay, last message arrival time. Okay, it has already come in. So the messages have started coming in. So if we go to monitor, we should be able to see, it's not showing it here, but we get to see that the data has actually started coming in because it says last message arrival time, whatever. And then pipeline, we can do some activities in the pipeline. For example, let me show you. If we want to do something, pipeline, in this pipeline, currently there may not be any activity. And let's say if I want to add an activity, stuff like that, what we can do is like, if I want to change the timestamp, temperature from one unit to the other, so things like that, we can easily do it here. But let's say I don't do any kind of activities here, and after the pipeline, the data ends up in the data store. So here there is like data that has been accumulating in, I mean, it also has got the data. Now what I can do with data sets is that, so currently this is the SQL query we have. When we run this query, what will happen is like we will get all the data from the ENV monitor data store, and it creates a data set out of it. Content, has it ever been run? Not yet. So there is no dataset content so far. Let me click on run now. So when I click on run now, it will run that SQL query on that data store, and it will create a dataset for us. Okay, it has succeeded. Now when I click on it, these are the different things that it has got: timestamp, temperature, pressure, device ID, all these stuff. Now let's say I want to modify this a little bit. So I can simply go ahead and then do, like, I want timestamp, I want temperature, humidity, pressure, device ID. From that test query, it will run that query and then it will give a sample of, if this were to work, this is how things will look like. Okay, which is good for us. Now we can update it. So I will not get the gas, and then there was altitude, all those things. I'm not getting it in this data set. I can have any number of data sets from a particular data store, because data store stores it persistently, and then data set we can specify that how often should the SQL query be running, and after it runs, should it deliver that query, should it deliver the result into something. So stuff like that we can easily do. Now we have a data set that is in IoT Analytics. Now if we want to visualize that in QuickSight, we can go to QuickSight, and uh, in, like, all our services are currently running in North Virginia, so we need to make sure that QuickSight is also, when we log into it, we are in North Virginia, which is good. Now I'll go ahead and then create a data set, new data set, and in here I can select IoT Analytics. It already shows me that this is a data set that you have available in this region. So I'll select that and then create data source. So it has already got some data in it. Let's say visualize. Now it will create an analysis based out of it, and then it will show me what values it has if it is. Okay, let's say I want to plot timestamp versus temperature, and I want timestamp here and temperature to be in y-axis. And then the timestamp has to be average, not really. Okay, I think we will quickly have to do a little bit of modification for this data set. What we want is to change this timestamp value into a valid value. So what I can do is I can have a new field, add calculated field, and then I can say, I can call it TS, and this TS could be like date, format date. Okay, converts epoch date. So all I may have to do is this one, epoch date, and then I need timestamp in it. Save it. So I will have a new field called TS, which has the timestamp in it. Now I don't need some of the fields in here. So what I will do is, okay, first I'll run this query again, so I don't have all these metrics. So once the query runs, it will have new content. Okay. And now if in the quick site as well, if I refresh, it will refresh and then it will only give me the fields that were there in latest. It will get rid of this device, sensor, gas resistance, altitude, and all that stuff. So in QuickSight, I can come to I can come and then create a new data set called IoT Analytics and create the data source. It has got some data into it. Let's visualize it. In QuickSight, we can click on new data set and then IoT Analytics, and here we can select the data set that has already been there, create the data source, and when we want to preview the data, it will just show up all that data here. It's good to convert this timestamp into an actual time. So I will go ahead and then add a new field into that table called as TS. Okay. Or let's call it date time. And then I want to convert that from epoch date. Save it, and then here we will have like this date time as well now. Now let's save and visualize. So it will create an analysis based on this. So I want to plot date time versus temperature, let's say. And I want this date time to be aggregated by minute. So this is how the values have been. And I can add device ID as the color here. So for different devices, whatever is the timestamp, based on it, it shows these values for us. And similarly, we can do it for the others as well. I can simply duplicate this visual, and in this visual, I don't need temperature sum, I need the average of it, which is like kind of steady here. Similarly, I want the humidity and its average. And I can have like more and more graphs, and then out of this analysis, what I can do is I can create a dashboard out of this. So I can click on share, publish dashboard, and then I can call it env monitor. And then when we publish the dashboard, basically it becomes, it only has those elements. We can share it with others, or we can embed it with uh, some web pages and all that stuff. We can do it. So this is how we can forward data from the devices to Greengrass, from there to IoT Core, IoT Analytics, and all the way to QuickSight. So this is how things work. Now, there's also one more service which is called Sitewise, which has, I mean, which is like really an amazing AWS service. What this does is like, instead of us having to forward all the data to quick site where the data, I mean, we cannot really look at the real time data there. It takes time for those graphs to refresh. The minimum refresh rate is like 1 hour. So whatever happened in the last 1 hour, we will not be able to monitor that. But if we had QuickSight, what happens is like QuickSight SiteWise works as one of the connectors in Greengrass itself. So locally, wherever you have Greengrass, you can have SiteWise in that, and then the SiteWise will actually give you like a monitor. So SiteWise collects the data, and then it builds a data model, and then from that model we will be able to monitor the different data patterns, how things have been moving in the edge itself. So that's what Sitewise allows us to do. Now, there are going to be like two ends of Sitewise. One runs in the edge, which gives us like local real time monitoring, but it also keeps pushing data to the AWS cloud where we can use that IoT Sitewise's modeled data to communicate with one of the applications, so it can store or it can do some kind of analytics processing, all that stuff. So that's what IoT Sitewise is all about. Okay, then. So these are like the different AWS services with regards to IoT. We will talk about Greengrass 2 and then the other services like Grafana and Sitewise, all these demos, maybe in one another session later on. Thanks for watching this video all the way through. See you. Take care.